all those other videos, Theo, Claudia, have been helpful to my report writing.
Oh, good.
Okay, I will drop the agenda in the chat just so that people have it. Well, let's get started because I want to make sure that people can go on and enjoy the rest of your day, whatever you are planning to do. Thank you all for joining our official first Truth and Reconciliation Planning Committee meeting. And just to be super clear again, this is just the planning committee. This is not the actual commission. What we are doing as a group is putting together the vision and the framework and some recommendations on should the city decide to proceed with this, what does it look like, how would it work, who should the members be, what are we focused on, etc. But before we get started, I would love to have everyone just quickly introduce themselves for the benefit of the people who are going to be joining the recording and could potentially join us in future weeks. So I am Kia Myers-Dugan. I am a PCCEP member and will be chairing this, this temporary subcommittee. I will do a little popcorn. I will go to Ann since you're next to me on my Brady Bunch screen.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Kia. Ann Campbell, PCCEP member. How about Amy Davidson?
Good morning, everybody. Sorry, I'm just getting situated here. Hey, Pat. My name is Amy Davidson, and I'm the Crime Survivor Program Director with Partnership for Safety and Justice, based here in Portland. And I'll pass to Barb.
Hi, my name is Barb Rainish. I am both a citizen and a PCCEP groupie and a freelance advocate.
I get so tickled when you say that, Barb. Thank you. Amy Anderson, I'll go to you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Anderson. I'm the chair of the Behavioral Health Subcommittee of PCCEP. And,
Jared.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jared Hager, he, him, and I am with the United States Department of Justice. I will pass it to Pat.
Morning, my name is Pat Adams. I'm a community member, and I started with this whole process back in the COAB days, and I have taken a little break here, and this particular topic is of great interest to me. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm not a PCCEP member. I'm not a PCCEP member.
And will you throw it to someone, Pat?
Oh, how about, yeah, how about Brody?
Hi, I'm Brody Sargent. I am a member of the Portland Police Bureau. I'm the Equity and Inclusion Specialist, Program Specialist.
Brody, do you want to toss it to someone?
Yes, I will toss it to Lakiana.
Great morning, everyone. Lakiana Drury here, alternate co-chair of PCCEP, and glad to be here. I'll pass it to Laurel.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Laurel Singer. I direct a program called the National Policy Consensus Center. We have a wide range of programs directed at solving community-based public policy issues, and we've been really interested in truth and reconciliation. And I am involved in a national group that's bringing together cities around the country that are interested in truth and reconciliation. And I'll be happy to bring back that information and represent Portland and what we're doing on that as well. So just an interested party and want to be a resource for however we can serve the work. And I'm going to turn it over to Carol, iPad 41. Carol? You're on mute if you want to unmute.
Yes, I want to unmute, and I did. Hi, and I have no idea why I'm iPad 41. This is Carol Landsman. I'm here with Jewish Voice for Peace, and she, her, and who hasn't gone yet? Marcia?
Elliot was raised. Oh,
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm calling in this morning, so I can't see anyone's names either. This is Marcia Perez, and I am the chair of the Racial Equity Subcommittee with PCCEP, and really excited to be here this morning. So if somebody else could go, if they haven't gone, I can't see you, I apologize.
Hi, I'm Elliot Young, PCCEP co-chair. Good morning to everyone. And I'll pass it to, I think Manuel had his hand up.
Hi, Manuel Padilla. I'm also with the National Policy Consensus Center, and more specifically with the program Oregon Solutions.
thank you. Mary Claire.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mary Claire Buckley, Inspector General at the Portland Police Bureau, and I do DOJ compliance.
Thank you, Mary Claire. Rochelle.
Hi, my name's Rochelle Silver. I'm a community member and a member of the Mental Health Alliance.
Thank you, Rochelle. And it looks like the last person to go might be a 503-753 number.
Hi, yes, this is Kristen Wright with the National Policy Consensus Center.
Great. Oh, Taji, did you go?
No, sorry. Hello, everyone. Taji Shestamet, he, him, and I'm the co-chair of the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Taji. I saw you come in and I wrote you down, but you didn't actually introduce yourself. So thank you. Thank you all for joining. Really glad to see all of you here to support us today. So before we get started, because some of you weren't in the initial discussion that we had about why we are forming this planning committee. So I just want to give a little bit of background. So this, as far as I can tell, this started from a promise from then Chief Outlaw back in 2019, where she had promised a truth and reconciliation type model, which then PCCEP followed with a recommendation back in 2020, which feels like a million years ago. But we had submitted a recommendation to stand up a truth and reconciliation work group to identify what this might look like. But it's also based on a survey that PPB did last year as well, where they identified community members and some officers who are very interested in wanting to hear an airing and an acknowledgement of historical harms, racism against the community at large. And so that is in large part why we are here today, to talk about what this, what our recommendations for a commission might look like, and how that might look going forward. So what I would like to do, I mean, this is a huge topic. Anyone who has done any research on truth and reconciliation knows that it is a massive undertaking. There are a lot of different versions of this model that live. There are some cities that have done pilot programs of this, of community and police departments. Many of us probably are aware that South Africa, after apartheid, they had a very large scale, very broad Truth and Reconciliation Commission as well. And there are a number of other ones that have taken place globally as well as nationally. But what we want to do today is at least just start the discussion on this first agenda item of, let's talk about what the intended mission could, should, would be for this commission were it to move forward with the city. So would love to hear if there are any thoughts, strong feelings on what you believe or would like to see in a truth and reconciliation type commission that the city might stand up. So I can start with some information or some, really what I have seen are typical goals and missions of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So I'll just toss it out and open it up for discussion. So, from a broad perspective, Truth and Reconciliation Commissions are set out to promote unity and reconciliation, and they do that through a couple of seemingly standard approaches. One, which I just mentioned, is to acknowledge the harm that has been done to marginalized communities, typically communities of color. But I know that, one of our key areas of focus are the mental health community. So we can talk about that a little bit later. But acknowledging harm is one of the first objectives or mission pillars. The other is to understand the harm. So to hear from those marginalized communities and to really develop a record, i.e. a database of what those past, present, current, ongoing harms have been. So there's an official record of this. There's an official record of the harm that has been perpetrated and to hear stories from these individuals. Then another pillar of a Truth and Reconciliation is to repair that harm. So that could come in the form of reparations, that can come in the form of identifying policies and procedures that replace or prevent harms from being perpetrated in the future. And then the last pillar, which is kind of related to the repair, is just a plan for ongoing support and unity and accountability and reconciliation. So again, policies and procedures that that really do put forth this more equitable public safety model that is done in collaboration with the communities that have been harmed historically. So would love to hear any reactions that anyone has on, if that's something that we should take up or, put forth as a recommendation, et cetera.
I have my hand raised. I don't know if you could see it, Kia.
Oh, I can't see.
Oh, sorry. I think if you open
Okay.
participants, maybe it'll show. So if no one else wants to go, I'll start. First of all, I think all those things you mentioned are things that sound great as part of the Truth and Reconciliation. The one thing I didn't hear is holding people accountable for past abuses that might be discovered in this process. And I know you talked about repair, so maybe that's included in repair, but some form of, I know some Truth and Reconciliation Commissions like grant immunity to anyone who participates in it, but others don't. And there's a question of whether holding people accountable for crimes that can be prosecuted is a good thing or not. I would think that it would be important not only to hear the stories, but actually to have accountability in that way.
Thank you for that, Elliot. Yes, I did forget to mention that was a big part of the TRC in South Africa, where they actually had, there were several committees, and that was one of the committees was to do an investigation and to, decide to grant amnesty or immunity. Any thoughts or reactions on that pillar being a part of or potentially part of one of our recommendations.
Yeah, I have a question for you real quick,
Yeah.
just for a little clarification.
Yeah.
What are you hoping to see as tangible outcomes from this? Like, give me an example.
That is something that we could
you would see. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask you to repeat that. I was talking over you.
I'm curious to know, what your pillars sound awesome, but I seem to hear proposed changes rather than definite outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see being a real outcome from this endeavor? What do you hope to see?
Well, I would like to open that up to this group here, and certainly Elliot kind of started that talk of accountability for the individuals. And I think this isn't just, we're not just talking about PPB, but I think we're talking about the overall government as well. And I see that Taji's raised his hand, so I won't forget you, Taji. So I think accountability is certainly, an important outcome, but I would love to hear what others have to share. And I'll just go to the raised hand. Taji?
Yeah, thanks. And Amy, I'm always thinking about this. And when we were initially talking about it, I also was wondering and trying to sort of wrap my head around that. One of the ways I was thinking that it might come into existence and operate is that, previous community engagement efforts from PPB have not really worked at doing this first step of acknowledging harm. And so I think there's a really important key point where the TRC's responsibility will to be identifying those harms, acknowledging them, and making sure those are sort of the first part of where we're going. And I think that'll really help further community engagement efforts that PPB may attempt to do, whether it's an advisor group, whether it's another initiative like that. I think it just generally speaking help repair harms in one way or another that were caused, so that moving forward there can be sort of actual substantive conversations around changes. So it's really not, I don't think TRC's responsibility is to like fix every problem that exists between the two communities, but it's opening up that, suture, or whatever you want to call it, and really starting those conversations and using that as a sort of foundational piece to future engagement efforts.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Taji. Marcia.
Yeah, thank you. Just along those lines, I think with what Taji is saying, particularly about acknowledgement, is I would agree 100% with what others are saying, but also I think it would be important for the community to define what acknowledgement would actually be satisfying, what acknowledgement actually seems genuine, and what type of acknowledgement is the community looking for in general. And be really specific about that, because I think that sometimes acknowledgements can come off as disingenuous. And I would want to make sure that the community feels like they are genuinely being heard and acknowledged. The second part of that is, Kia, I'm wondering if you have insight or can share kind of what your thoughts are about what the city's, it's one thing I think government loves to create committees. So I'm just curious what the support behind the city is in the long run. What are they willing to do to make sure an appropriate acknowledgement is made? If it comes down to really, radical things that come out of this, are they willing to make the changes? What is the buy-in on the government in? Because if not, we're just having these conversations and checking another box, which I'm sure people are aware of. So that's my comment.
Thank you for that, Marcia. And I think, however this recommendation plays out, the recommendation can't just be, okay, here here's the package of what a Truth and Reconciliation Commission looks like. I think there needs to be a conversation and a, you know, kind of agreement from whatever we recommend from the city to say, or for us to say, this is what, in order for this to be successful, and in order for this to not create more harm, you know, because by people sharing their stories, that is, you know, they're having to relive whatever happened, correct? So, you know, if we, you know, we create a platform, we create a venue for people to share their harms, however people see most fit to, you know, identify and have that acknowledgement. There has, us as the recommending committee, to say there has to be agreement from the city that you're going to take action on repairing, on healing these wounds and these harms that have been done. It can't, and I agree with you, Marcia, it can't just be talk, right? It can't be checking the box and say, we did this, and, you know, there has to be movable action on the part. So I think in addition to submitting the recommendation, there has to be a discussion, a commitment on the record that there will be action taken from what comes of this. Barb, before I go to the other raised hands, Barb, I just wanted to talk to you about your question in the chat. I'm not sure I understand your question. How much cop buy-in did Chief Outlaw? You asking what her buy-in was?
Sorry, how much buy-in did she get? It made sense to me as I was trying to type it, I guess. Sorry. You guys said that Chief Outlaw promised to do this, blah, blah, blah. And that question was how much so she wanted to do it. How much buy-in did she have from the rest of the force? You can't force people to do this. They have to want to do this.
Absolutely.
And to clarify the other question that's underneath it that has the dots next to it.
Yes.
It's like Elliot's talking about punishing those who have harmed people, but you're talking about, and it makes more sense your way, that it's got to be, the people can't be charged. I can't think of the right words, but you know, that they're not held, they're held accountable, but they're not like put in immunity. Thank you, Elliot.
Yeah.
Okay, so that makes sense now, right?
Yes.
All right, going back under.
Yes. Yes. And so to answer your first question, I am not clear on how much buy-in was in the department. And Mary Claire, certainly if you have any input on that of what the, you know, what the temperature was in the department when Chief Outlaw had made that statement. But I am not clear. That is just what has come up, what had come up in my readings. So, and then with regard to accountability versus amnesty versus immunity, again, I think that is something that we have to make a recommendation on, you know, and we'll go with what the majority of the committee believes. But there are some Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that are about justice and retribution, and there are some that are just like, we want to just have this acknowledgement. We want to hear the people that perpetrated the harm, the violence, what have you. We want them to publicly admit the wrong that they did, and then as a community, we move forward. But I want us to make that recommendation on what we want to see come from that. Lakiana, your hand is raised. Oh, sorry, Mary Claire.
Oh, no, I just wanted to answer your question in that, you know, obviously I worked with Chief Outlaw at the time this came up. This is actually arose as part of our community engagement plan that Bureau was to develop in collaboration with the PCEP. And so I can tell you that she was fully committed to this. Her view was that it should be initially was that it should be a broader approach because obviously the police bureau is not the only one that is engaged in these practices of injustice, going from, all areas of society. But, and so that's what the original, her original approach was. I understand that you folks have talked to the mayor and want to focus in on the police bureau. And I can tell you that I spoke to Chief Lavelle just the other day about this as we're trying to identify members of the bureau who will be actively involved in this. I don't think, as the Mental Health Association used to say, nothing about us without us. I think that it's important that the bureau be actively involved in this process for a number of reasons. But I can assure you that Chief Lavelle is committed to this work as well. So I just want to assure you all of that.
Thank you, Mary Claire. Lakiana.
Hey again. Love the discussions going on so far. I think they're really important. I shared this with Kia. I've shared this with some other PCEP members as well. But for me, this process has to be very intentional about how this work gets done and what is being asked. And in the broadest sense, we're asking the community to engage in the city and in PPB with a very challenging discussions that has a big potential to be more harmful than actually positive if it's not done outright. And the framing of this is more essential than anything else. And I think that that's the place that we have to start. And I don't feel that we're there yet. So anything's like missions or like what could the scope of work could be, if we're not on the same page as far as alignment and what is being done, none of the other work can be done. And even acknowledging that this is not the first time. The community's been trying to do truth and reconciliation, not under that banner, but trying to survive and trying to reconcile these things for so long. And so even that has to be the framework. The framing is so important to this. We just talked about commitment. I personally have very large concerns about the true commitment. Individuals can say things about their interest in being a part of it, but the actual commitment of the institutions is very critical. And PPB in the city, I do not personally feel that they are ready for that commitment. And if they are, I think it needs to be very clearly defined as to where they are in this space. We should be able to know right now as a committee where they stand on these and what does that commitment really look like beyond just like we want to engage in this process. That buy-in is just really critical. And I believe also putting their resources and things up front right away. I do not believe that anybody of color should move this work for free. The only people on this call right now that are working for free are the community members and the PCEP members that are being asked to move this. And I do not think it is equitable to ask Black people or any people of color, you can call them BIPOC, however you want to define it, for free on this at any point in this work. So personally moving forward, I'm not going to attend any more of these meetings unless the city finds money to pay the Black, Brown, Indigenous people of color who are moving this work. And I think that is a first baseline level commitment. We want to talk about reparations. You want to talk about, we don't even want reparations down the line. We want it now. Why just that group? Because we are the ones that have been marginalized by this. When we look at police brutality, when we look at slavery, when we look at the Indigenous Holocaust, those are the things. Why do we do a land acknowledgement every time we start a meeting? Because the land was stolen. Why do we have the term BIPOC? Because our groups have been historically left out. And in a country of white supremacy, right? And so then to ask non-white groups to move work caused by white harm for free is not setting the right standard that you are serious about this work. So that is my thought on this. I think we should move forward on it, but I personally do not want to participate in a process if I do not feel that commitment is there. And I'm willing to work with whoever it is to get those things figured out, but the optics of it have to be real. And for me, this is very serious. And it's got to be something that the city wholeheartedly puts its effort in and understands what it is asking. And if they don't understand what they're asking, then we can remind them with our service and what we choose to engage in. So I'll hop off my soapbox, but that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Lakiana. Really appreciate your comments. Amy Davidson, I think that's the last hand raised. Amy.
Yeah, thanks. And Lakiana, yes, and yes to everything you just said. I wanted to just go back to the question though about like tangible outcomes. Maybe we're still on that question and just floating a bit through it. Because I'm a very big fan of specific and measurable outcomes, but I also want to just be a little bit thoughtful, I guess, in the intent of like looking ahead, while the purpose of the process is or typically at least of a TRC is to go back to, you know, where the wound was made, right? Like to find healing there. Because it's really like, I don't know, white supremacy culture brought us things like evidence-based outcomes that have not accounted ever for things like culture and, you know, have left a lot of people out. And so, you know, I'm just like thinking in those terms that you know, if the intent is to bring people together and hear stories, so that we can create impact, you know, I imagine that this could happen. I don't know, like maybe in phases, like, because ideally the information that's gleaned from this is something that helps shape what the repair looks like. Like that's often, you know, what is restorative is that people who were harmed get to name what justice looks like for them, because there's not one iteration of that, right? Everybody here knows that. So I'm just kind of throwing that into the mix that like I understand that to get buy-in, it will be important to name that, but like Lakiana, that's a great example what you just gave is just like parts of that you can start now by paying people to do this and to give their time and their energy to that. But other parts, I would just encourage folks to consider leaving some openness around that. Yeah, anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate that. Pat, I see you.
Thank you, Kia. And yeah, I'm really liking the discussion. It's really, and I'm no expert on truth and reconciliation or on restorative justice, but I do hang with some people who really are experts and talked with them. And one of the fellows, he said, you know, it's sequential. First comes truth. And you don't move on to reconciliation until there's enough truth. And he said the 2 things that are necessary for this process are courage and patience. And just a little, you know, what comes to me about this, you know, a little thing, a vision was to have the children of Black parents or grandparents who were denied the ability to live where they wanted to, who were denied loans so that they could have a house, and you know, who were preyed upon and maybe paid for their house more than once because the loans that were available to all the Pale people were not available to them. And together with perhaps the child or whoever now of the person who denied the loan request, sitting in the bank at their desk, looking at this loan and saying, this person is Black, they're in the wrong neighborhood, or maybe the bank manager, right? But it to me, it's like that close, and you can't predict. You can't, yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pat. Amy.
Yeah, wow, this really got me thinking when you said truth and justice and people who have been harmed. You know, every day I walk downtown and in my job, I see hundreds of people who are being harmed every day because we don't have enough resources, because we can't sustain them out of jail. And now we have COVID, you know, and a lot of the folks are seriously mentally compromised now because of the conditions they're forced to live in. And so justice and truth, to me, you're right, Pat, it's a long process, and it really needs to encompass every human being who's been hurt by lies and deception and things that we ignore because we're privileged. And I'm going to say that as my own responsibility to being white and being privileged, is there's a lot of things I didn't understand in the beginning, but I definitely understand now. And that is Oregon's history has been racist and marginalized since we were formed. The Constitution of Oregon is, you know, for some of us, it's sickening to read it. That all these people were excluded from having the right to live and buy homes in Oregon. So I don't know if this can be a single entity, you know, responsibility, because Mary Claire was right. This is a much bigger picture if we're talking about truth and reconciliation, at least in my book, because the mentally ill here in Portland have been seriously harmed and hurt and are still marginalized along with everybody else. So let's look at this as a much bigger picture, because there's a lot of people who have been harmed by the things happening in our communities. So that's, thank you. That's really hit me hard.
Thank you, Amy. So yes, this is a huge issue. This is a huge issue. This is a huge topic. Amy, I'll get to you in a second. And so for additional context, because, you know, we are the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing. And while I do not disagree that this is a much larger issue, our charge right now in this moment for the foreseeable future is communities' engagement and harm at the hands of PPB, and acknowledging that. And so, you know, that is our charge. So I again, not discounting the other harms, but we have a specific lane that we need to be in. And with regard to some additional context with our discussions with the city on this is, you know, because we could talk about a lot of different bureaus under the umbrella of the city, and the ask was specifically for us to focus around PPB. So just to level set a little bit further, that is what this group's charge is. Amy Davidson.
Yeah, I'll just offer also that as I'm hearing folks talk, you know, this really could help inform other work that happens at the state level. I think from the perspective because I work at an organization that does statewide criminal justice policy reform, so we engage with folks all around the state who have a very deep interest in this happening at the state level. So that said, you know, clearly this is intended for this community, by this community, and that's important that remains. But they're just to name, there's a lot of local legislators who are like really with this, that really want this to happen and want to help drive this on a much larger scale, like that may feel a little more like the vision that Chief Outlaw had, to take into account a lot of other institutions that could engage in a similar process. So not to say that, you know, leadership or, you know, who's really driving this should expand beyond the city, but certainly it'd be lovely to invite folks at the state level to just learn,
Yeah.
potentially. Yeah.
Yeah. Elliot.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing, I mean, Kia, agree that the charge we've been given by the city is to focus on the police bureau and take that as our lane. I think the thing we do need to decide though is what kinds of harms we're going to be looking at. And I think mostly what people have been talking about is the sort of the big harms towards groups, racial discrimination, groups that have been discriminated on the basis of race or ethnicity. But there are other groups, as Amy and Barb in the chat have mentioned, people with mental illness. We could look at the community of people experiencing homelessness who have been harmed as well by the PPB. And I think we need to decide that, you know, whether we're going to focus on one particular area or take a more expansive view. I would argue that we should take the more expansive view in terms of looking at all of the harms towards all of those communities. And then to Lakiana's point, I think, you know, I think it's a really good one, and we should think about, okay, if that's something this group wants to demand, you know, that people get paid for this work. How are we going to make that? Do we agree to make that? Should it only be for BIPOC people? Should it be for people who come from communities that have experienced harm? Should it be for everybody? And what is a fair rate of compensation? And I'll stop there.
Taji.
Yeah, excuse me. I guess my initial reaction is that I'm worried, you know, one of the things we just talked about was if there's not intentionality behind this, it could sort of lead to, you know, more negative implications than positive. I'm worried if we are being more expansive with the type of reconciliation that we'll be working towards, that we might not, if we have an expansive scope, that we might not get to the root of what we're trying to do in regards to truth and reconciliation. Does that make any sense? So I'm saying that there is harm caused by PPB to, for example, the houseless community in Portland, and I'm assuming the houseless community across the country, as the police have been charged with expansively looking at different communities, even if it's not the charge of what they should be doing. However, understanding the historical context of policing, which is inextricably tied to slavery, there is a necessary mandate behind looking at the harm caused to specifically BIPOC communities and the way policing, and it has been used as a political tool for white supremacy for 200 plus years. So I'm worried if we expand it and we're looking at something else that I would say is from the root cause of what policing started at as a violently purported state-sanctioned entity that specifically would ensure the marginalizations of communities of color, expanding that where the police, not until the last 40 years, had the tools and used them to then police all communities inextricably and to an not inextricably, but to a further effect in the more recent years. They were not previously meant to be people who helped those in the houseless community, They were not meant to previously. And I do recognize the settlement agreement, but this is not something that was pulled from the settlement agreement. PCCEP as a body is operating for the mandate of the settlement agreement, but after the settlement agreement has been finished, it'll be part of the codification of the city of Portland to work in community engagement efforts twofold, overarchingly. So I want to say that we don't necessarily have, as a PCCEP, have to have all of our issues focused on one or another or both or in anything. So I'm just saying that we have an opportunity to discuss this. I wanted to raise that point. And that's sort of where I'm thinking right now. And it's not like I have a definitive mindset on it, but that's just sort of what my initial thoughts were.
So and we've kind of blown through my agenda, which I definitely wanted to get to the groups. And I feel like that is probably where we should have started, is to talk about, you know, the scope in terms of the group or groups that we're going to be speaking to. Elliot, your hand is raised.
I mean, just in response to Taji a little bit, this should not go from Black Lives Matter to All Lives Matter, as Pat says. I think, you know, one of the prime focus of this clearly has arisen from, like, what you're saying, the policing and its history with white supremacy. But it's not true historically that policing, you know, has only focused on these other groups in the last 40 years. In Los Angeles, for instance, beginning of the 20th century, 100% of the people put in the local jail in Los Angeles were white. And they were vagrants. They were people who were, you know, picked up because they were seen as, they were unemployed, and so they were criminalized that way. There's a longer history of that, recognizing that the history of policing does go back to slavery, and there's a through line there. So I don't think it has to be an either or. I think we could both center the connection between white supremacy and policing historically and in the present, and also recognize that other groups have been harmed. And I don't think that is going to diminish that focus. But it, you know, that's just my view, and I would hate for it to diminish that focus on the history of the connection between policing and racism.
And maybe there's a way to somehow do, sorry, Kia. I was really quickly to respond to Elliot points. I think there should be a way to then we could do, I think they can't be overlapping. I think they have to be done in two separate lanes then, so that there can be recognition of the two different ways in which policing has affected different communities. Because I'm not saying there isn't, and I've seen plenty of comments. I know there's effects of policing in the mental health community and the houseless community. I'm not saying there isn't. I'm just saying I think there needs to be two different ways that we then look at this. And so so that makes it, I'm saying it makes it bigger, because I don't think we can just overlap all communities harmed by policing and then try to reconcile that. Because I feel like I was a police officer and I was asked, you know, do you think that policing has harmed BIPOC community? They may say yes to that, and they may say no to the other, you know. So it's sort of like, how do you do both and make sure you're doing it intentionally? That's why I was saying maybe we should focus on one right now, and then maybe we do another one later if this works for this community, for example.
And so I think that's an important transition point. And Amy, I think you said this earlier, in that, you know, if we do focus, that doesn't mean that these learnings cannot be applied to other, you know, to another version of this commission, right? Should we stand it up? So, you know, and what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is that, you know, that this first step out of the gate, you know, in terms of a recommendation, is that perhaps we do focus on race, so that we can really, you know, because if you aim big, you miss big, right? But if we can aim small and get it right, but if we have too large of a focus, again, that can bring about even more harm, because we're, you know, our focus is diverted and we're not giving enough time and energy to each of the communities that are harmed. So, you know, don't want this to become the oppression Olympics, but I think that the way that we set ourselves up for success right out the gate is to focus our scope on communities of color that have been harmed by the police. So just let's take, I don't know if you want to send me a private message or, you know, a vote, but I mean, how are people feeling about if we initially focus? And Barb, I've seen your comments in the chat about removing it from PCCEP. While this is a set, and Jared, I would love for you to speak to this, but, you know, the mental health part of PCCEP, using Jared's word here, that's the floor. right? That is not all that we have to focus on. And this initiative, you know, it is a community engaged policing initiative. While it may not be directly connected to the settlement, this is part of the work that we do. Jared, do you have additional commentary on that?
Yeah, I think I take the point, and you know, I am sensitive to the view that there are lots of people who have been harmed and have grievances to raise. But the point I hear you making, Kia, is correct. That, you know, just because the settlement agreement focused on one aspect of a historically, you know, disenfranchised or harmed group, doesn't mean the PCCEP is so limited. In fact, the PCCEP was deliberately drafted broadly so that you guys could develop your own agenda. And if you want to focus on race issues in one aspect or another, including this Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that is for you all to decide. I don't think the settlement agreement or the PCCEP plan should be seen to push you one way or another. I think it's open for your discussion and evaluation and decision.
And I'm seeing Manuel, I missed your question, but I saw Taji reiterate. Are you still?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a newcomer to this, so I just want to name that and appreciate appreciate all that I've missed, right? But I think really clarifying the sort of terms of art that are being used here is going to be a very, very important component of the work moving forward. And so that, I mean, because one of the goals of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission is understanding and clarity, right? So I think that the process needs to reflect that, even among the people that are the ones who are sort of charged with carrying the process for creating and carrying the process moving forward. And so I'd be curious to kind of know sort of, is there sort of a consensus on how policing is being framed, how police are being framed, how victims are being framed, how are people being called perpetrators, are they being called offenders, are they being called those who've done harm, those who've been harmed, are victims being called victims, or are they being called something else? I think in this process, I think understanding that there are sort of different models for how this work is approached, not different models necessarily for the process themselves, but sort of philosophical approaches, and kind of making a decision on what of those philosophical approaches the group wants to land on, or what pieces it wants to take from, like, I mean, for instance, it would make a difference whether or not you're taking a restorative justice model approach, or you're taking some other model or approach, and that would help to, it would just help to clarify sort of the work to be done from a very sort of foundational sense, because you don't want people who are engaging with this process to all have different understandings of the activity that they are participating in. So yeah, so that's just the one thought that comes up as I'm sort of trying to get acquainted with and listening to what's happening here.
Sure. Thank you, Manuel. Amy.
Yeah, after listening to Taji's breakout and Elliot's and everyone's breakout, I think you guys are right. I think starting with race would be a great foundation to center on, and then we can branch out, incorporating other communities, because it's better to do one thing great than to try to do it poorly by spreading out too far. So listening to everything, it makes sense to do single focus and then expand as we are able during accomplishments, of goals. So I'm all for centering on one thought, but Lakiana did mention that he felt that BIPOC people shouldn't work on the plan unless they're paid. Well, how do you get the job done if there is no money to get paid with? That's kind of my next question. Commitment.
Yes. Short answer is there is money for that, and if the city wants to find it, they can, and if they're committed to it. And I know Commissioner Hardesty is behind the idea of this work having a budget to it, and that budget should include money for those. Everything we do in this process should reflect the outcomes that we are trying to work for. So if we're talking about equity and centering race and anything like reparations or paying people or understanding the work that they're doing, then that must be included in it. And just reminding us that, right, like this is a very large task to give to a community volunteer group. And no one on the city staff or PPB staff would be expected to come to any of this for free. And that same standard should be held for the members, especially when you're trying to engage marginalized groups in that process. So I think, I'll just to say that I think we should think about that budget. It has to be a part of it, and I'll leave it.
And Lakiana, just for clarity, are you saying, I think I heard you, but am I hearing that this planning work should be paid in addition to the actual commission that gets stood up potentially? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yes, because right now, right, and in addition to the work that PCEP's already doing, that stipend for PCEP is not, that covers PCEP work. And while this does have some implications of PCEP in it, I think it's broader than that. And I think that speaking only for myself, I want to feel that the city and PPB has real buy-in to this. And so it should be in addition to it. And they should realize the ask that they are making, right? If you ask somebody for something, then you should be prepared for their response of what it will take for them to do this. And it is the right thing to do to pay, particularly the members of color, right? Because there is a direct correlation. There is no history of white people not being paid for labor that built this country. There is a huge history of that for Black people. And so that's when we think about that. And we just got to challenge our views. Yeah, it might feel uncomfortable for some white people. Like, why are we focusing on race? Well, I mean, just look back on the history of this country. It was pretty uncomfortable as well, being in slavery and facing the other things that we faced in this country. So as we're trying to reverse it, these are the things that it's going to look like. We are trying to reverse and equal out playing fields that haven't been done. And just reminding everybody that the work that is being asked, and I said this before, I don't take it lightly what is being asked. And I want them to understand what they are asking of us to do. And part of that is by putting the resources so that we can be successful.
Thank you, Lakiana. I see your hand raised, Barb. I just want to, we are at time, but I do, since Barb and Marcia, I will go to you first because I saw your hand raised first. We will close with those two questions and comments, and then we will wrap, and I will, if you are interested in staying a part of this conversation, just drop your email in the chat if I don't have it already, so that I can follow up with you afterwards. Marcia.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to echo, I really do want to echo what Lakiana has said. I couldn't agree more. And I want to go back to a comment that was put in the chat by Taji, which was about intersection. So I'm hearing that this is a kind of a constant poll among PCEP members, because the nature of the settlement agreement did come out mostly because of people with mental health issues, and I think it might make sense to gain a deeper understanding of the intersections of race and mental health in this community, and it will naturally uncover the disparities around equity. So and really defining like what we mean by disproportionality, because I don't think, I mean, I agree that we should, like, if we center race, we're also going to see, hey, people with mental health issues, and particularly the BIPOC community, are disparately impacted by policing in this community. So I don't think it has to be one or the other, but if we naturally center race, it will come out. And so that's maybe just something to be aware of, and to be cognizant of as we do this work and move it forward, so that we're not saying we're just focusing on the Black community and not focusing on mental health, because there are intersections there. And we all know that the Black community, BIPOC communities don't have access to mental health. And so, and disparately are impacted by symptoms of mental health, because racism, in my opinion, is a public health issue. And so thinking about that from a larger scale, and just having a more solid understanding of those intersections, I think could be a good strategy for this group as we make a recommendation for the larger group.
Thank you, Marcia. And Barb.
Hey, I feel a little bit misunderstood. I agree with the intersection is great, and we can find people to help toward that. That's just been the question that we've had from the beginning of this being brought to PCCEP this year. And as the behavioral health part, we've just really taken a back seat. But I like the idea of the intersectionality part. And yeah.
Yeah, and I certainly don't disagree that it's not going to come up. So, you know, we, in our next meeting, because this is the first of a few, in our next meeting, we can blow that out a little more broadly, so that we do have, so we can come to a consensus on what that scope should be, where those points of intersection might happen, so that we can be clear and all be on the same page. So thank you all so very much for joining. Going forward, we will shift these to the evenings. I'm thinking 5 o'clock on Mondays as opposed to 9 a.m. So look for more information. We will send out a recording of this meeting, and I will just send out you know, a little recap and what we will focus on in the next meeting. And certainly, if you have any thoughts between now and February 1st, we're meeting bi-weekly, please feel free to email me. So thank you all again for joining. I hope you have a really wonderful rest of your Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Theo, do you have, oh, sorry, you probably want to see who's talking to you. Do you have a second to call me or whatever? Did you and Judith read? Oh, wait, no, you're not working today.
We're on holiday.
Never mind.
What?
What?
I said, we're on holiday, but I can give you a call. What's up, Jared?
Oh, what's up, Theo? Hi, Barb.
Hey, Jared, thanks for backing me.
Oh. Your point was very well put. I mean, there's lots of intersectionalities. I think Amy hit it on the head too. You know, start and do it well one, and then you can replicate it.
Oh yeah, no, that's all fine. It's just that's been the question.
Yeah, no, and it's up for you guys. I don't want to put my thumb on the scale either way. I mean, it's a hornet's nest I don't want to touch.
Okay.